daven. We'll just like stay here and learn like the entire morning.
Didn't you have that on the night of Shavuos?
Shavuos night, right? That's Shavuos night. Make Shavuos every week. Okay. All right. Let's see. Do I have a text under?
Sweetie.
Good morning, everybody. Good Shabbos. Shabbos. Good Shabbos. You know what? Do this. I don't know if.
Hey, how are you? It's a tough game.
All right. Here's bits. Eden, did you guys send me the PDF so I could?
I already have the PDF and the link. Yes.
Oh, can you? Is it? Let's see. Okay, I got it. You put it in there. I want to open it up here so I can share it.
Awesome. I just put it in the chat if you
Yeah,
need
thank
it.
you
Yeah,
so much.
of course.
Thank you, Caroline. All right, let's do Brachot the Torah. Let's start, everybody. Ready? Baruch atah Amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody, to kvetch or not to kvetch. I don't know if we did this, but if we did, it's worth repeating. Thank you, but yeah, it's like funny. I know, Zoe. So to kvetch or not to kvetch, that's the question. To be honest, kvetching doesn't mean the same thing in Yiddish as it does in English. Kvetching in Yiddish means to press or squeeze something, but in English it means to complain, right? To kvetch. Krexing, do we even know what a krex is versus a kvetch?
That's something physical,
A krex is a sigh. It's a sigh. A krex is a sigh. And in Hebrew it would be anacha, an anacha. Some people like you can terrorize people with your sighs. Anybody know anybody like that?
Yes.
One size fits, persecutes all. It's like a sire, someone is always sighing. And the sigh, there's a holy sigh and there's a not so holy sigh. Maybe we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm trying to see where I can get the it's downloaded, but I want it to open. I guess its only option is to download it. I wonder where it downloaded it to. Can't see. Stay there. Let's see what it's probably in the downloads. Okay, you know what? Maybe Carol, you'll share. It's okay. You can just share.
I could share. Yeah.
You'll share the screen. Okay, let's go to source. Good, thank you. Source 1 on the screen so everybody can see. And I guess the first page. There's a great fetching quiz, by the way. That's a hyperlink. If you get the original, it's on the Yivo on the Yiddish. It's great. It's a great quiz, and it's basically Yiddish complaints that need to be translated. They give you 3 different options for a complaint. So one of them is like, yeah, it's like yeah, but then the real ones like, if I listen, I would admit that I would agree with you, except then both of us would be wrong. That's one good one. I would agree with you, but both of us would be wrong. It's like, complaint. But there are other good complaints. Yiddish is kind of the Ur language of fetching. But the original, what they call in the first source, the national sport of Jews, which is to complain, the food is terrible, portions are so small, you didn't like the other tie.
I don't get that.
You didn't like that tie. It's more like a passive-aggressive dig.
Oh.
So there's a Venn diagram of passive-aggressive digs and complaining, right? Let's look at this source number 2, which is this is chapter 11 of the book of Bamidbar, this morning's. I think the Rabbi Koloresis might have looked at this source sheet and then give it var last night about kvetching, about complaining and what's at the heart of it and grief. So I want to look at how various things are expressed in complaint, holy complaint, not so holy complaint, and we'll look at a business study also on what complaining means in the workforce. Let's look at source 2. Vayia am kimit oninim. Everybody see that? The people took to complaining bitterly. See that? Source 2? In the Hebrew, just note the prefix ki, the letter chaf in the front of a word, which is interesting here. Vayia am kimit onanim. It's. I mean, you have to take it seriously because it's there in the Torah, and it can't just mean they were. It can't mean the same thing as vayia am mit onanim, right? Because there's a letter there, so it changes something. It would, and the translation doesn't really do it justice. Although maybe the most hyper literal would not really be useful here for the translator to get stuck in what the ka means. But translation here is, and the people complained bitterly before God. So in the Hebrew, ra be'oznei Adonai, evil ra bitterly in the ears of God. Why in God's ears? Vayishma Adonai, and God heard. Interesting that God heard. No one else heard. Vayicharapa, and God got angry. God's nose flared. Literally what it means. Vativ arbam eish Adonai, and a fire of God burned in them. Vatochal, and ate in the Ksei Machane, in the, I guess, the outskirts, the edges of the camp. Vaitzak Amal Moshe, and then the people cried out to Moses and said, and they don't say what it says, right? They just cried out, apparently without any words. But are people with me? Going in the Hebrew, English. I'm not actually in the English on the left side. I'm just randomly translating it. Vayitpalel Moshe el Adonai, and Moses prayed to God. Vatishka ha'esh, and the fire, I guess, subsided, or it like a sun sets. It set. The fire set, right? Vatishka. Vayikra Makom, and someone, or it was called. Who called it? I don't know exactly. It became known as Tav Eira. That's the name of the place. Tav Eira. Ivara Vam Eish Adonai, because in them, Bam, fire of Adonai was burning. The word Ba'ara, Bo'er, is to burn. So the place became known as burning, or the burning man, like the burning place of burning. Yeah. Now that's scene one. Everybody got that? Scene one. Like there's a pause. Okay, I made it clear with this little space between the paragraphs here on page one. And then scene two. Now the asaf suf, a unique word in the Bible, asaf suf, from the word lesof, to come together, like the stragglers, the ones who gathered together, asaf suf, from the word esof, lesof, to be gathered in, translated beautifully by Everett Fox as the riffraff. Asaf suf. It's a neologism. It's like a completely new word. It doesn't appear. Anyway, Asher B'Kibo, the ones who were in their midst, Hitavu Ta'ava. Now they had a craving. They craved a craving. The literal translation here, the Hitavu, it's reflexive. They were caused to have Ta'ava. So now we have juxtaposed in scene one, burning, right? A place called Taveira, and complaining without any content. They don't complain about anything in particular. And now we have the second scene where these riffraff get together, and they have a ta'ava, they have a desire. Ta'ava is something. The word ta'ava appears in the first time in the Bible in the Garden of Eden story. Va'etz nechmad lemar'eh, and that the tree was beautiful to see, but and there was a ta'ava, right? Chava is also connected. The word Eve is connected to ta'ava, life force. Right? Iva, the Moshe, Chava, Iva. So there's something, like they want something. Vayashuvu vayivku, and they sit and they cry. And then Gam b'nei Israel, and then also the children of Israel join in. Vayomru, and then all together they finally articulate what they want. Mi achilenu basar, who will feed us meat? Like in my big fat Greek wedding. So you don't eat no meat. It's vegetarian. I don't eat no meat. You don't eat no meat. We'll give him the lamb. Okay, the lamb. We remember the fish that we ate. Oh, the fish. Oh, we had free fish. Gefilte fish, white fish. It was great. We remember that we ate in Egypt and it was free, chinam. By the way, are they paying for anything right now? No. Okay. Okay. It was free. With also the kishuim, the gourds, the cucumbers, the avatichim, the melons, the garlic, the onions. I mean, I think a lot of us are familiar with this kvetch. This is a groise kvetch. This is like the ur kvetch. We had it better in Egypt when we were slaves, but we had free food at least. It was great. It was like catered food. Ve'ata, and now nafshenu yivesha, and now our souls are dry. It's so dramatic. Our souls are dry. Ain kol bilti elaman. There is nothing at all but this mana that we have to look at. This mana. Now the narrator interrupts this flow, which is great narratively. Next source 3, which is the very next verse. I'm sorry that I put it into another source. It's the next verse. And then it says, Haman, not Haman from, right? Interesting, but Haman, not Haman, the evil, despot, genocidal maniac, but the man itself, the mana, in verse 7. Now, the narrator says, now let me tell you about this man that they're kvetching about. It's kizera gadhu. It's like coriander seed in color. It was like bdellium, right? It was beautiful to look at. I mean, talk about something beautiful. It's beautiful to look at. And they would go and collect it, right, every day. People go out and they grind it into millstones, make it into a mortar. They would boil it in a pot. They'd make it into cakes. And what did those cakes taste like? Like rich cream, l'shed hashamen. Now, and it not only did it taste good and look good, it would come down with the dew every morning, so it was consistent, and it felt like dew, which is beautiful. Like the dew fell on the camp, and the mana would be like on following it down. So the narrator feels the need to interject into their complaint, so that the reader, the listener, throughout the generations will say, "Wow, what an interesting fetch." Like they're saying how horrible it was to look at this mana, and then like as if you were in a play, the narrator would turn to the audience and say, "Now let me tell you about this mana. It was not so bad to look at, and it tasted like rich cream. And guess what? It came down on the dew." But they wanted watermelon and gourds and meat. Okay, so we have two scenes, very distinct scenes. The opening scene, the people are mitonanim, and they're sort of like mitonanim. We're not sure what that means. God is the only one who hears it, but no one else seems to hear it. Right? There seems to be some burning that takes place. There's some reaction from the divine. Why does God get upset? What exactly is the nature of that anger? What happens right between scene 1 and then scene 2, and why does it shift from the general displeasure and its reaction, which would have generally, like scene 1 should have been enough to have scene 2 not happen on some level. Like if scene 1 takes place and there's a complaining and God says, "I'm really not happy," and there's some kind of burning in the camp, we don't know what happens, but there's something happens. The Torah wants us to know very clearly that when you're mitonen, when you're doing this complaining, it's probably not like this God's not exactly patient with you. And then nonetheless, verse 4, scene 2 begins, and there's some riffraff. And the riffraff, start to agitate. And then the people start to be agitated, and they hit avut ava. They have a need. So let's go into some of these questions, okay? And let's look at some of the way that our sages tackled this difficult section. So look at source 4 from the great medieval commentator Yitzhak Arama. The subject of their grumblings is not revealed at this juncture. Can you see that? Since at the beginning they kept it inside. How does he know they kept it inside? Anybody want to say? Where did he get that from?
Only Hashem heard.
Only Hashem heard. Only Hashem heard. Only Hashem heard. So why does it have to tell me only Hashem heard? Because clearly no one else did. That's, in other words, the fact that it doesn't say anybody else heard their grumblings means that it was inside of them. in his opinion. Later, they clothed their discontent in the form of a hankering for meat. Though at the beginning, their discontent smoldered within them, the God, who knows the thoughts of men, was well aware of what was going on inside their hearts. The phrase, and God heard, implies that God understood the situation, though nothing had actually been explicitly said. And then the text notes, if you look at the next source 5, thanks, Caroline. Just a little, there you go, good. The text notes that the people did not learn the lesson of the punishment, though they suffered decimation from God's anger. In other words, there were consequences to their complaining. They saw the negative consequences, and it didn't actually, right? They reverted to their grumblings. They did not lust for meat or any particular item of food, but simply indulged in lusting or desire or craving. This is very Buddhist, right? Craving, craving, craving. This is much worse than the case of a man who is overcome by their desires. When the people saw the hankering of the mixed multitude, the riffraff, they began once more to weep and lust as at the beginning. This time, however, they expressed their discontent openly. Okay, so Yitzchak Arama, let's just see Yitzchak Arama as one voice in our Beit Midrash. It's one voice. We can have a different voice if we want, but his interpretive mode is based on his close reading of the text. What is his evidence? Only God hears, it seems, right? Or at least the text only tells us God heard. Doesn't mean that no one else heard, but the text seems to go out of its way to say that God heard without saying, and the people heard. So that's an indicator to him that this is something between this group and God and not between these people and the broader population. And he says, based on this, that there had a general discontent. They didn't really have any specific fetch, which is a general anomy. Like they're just like something is off in the world. I don't know. It's existential. I don't know. I'm a little bit on something. I don't know. It's dukkha. It's suffering. I don't know. And then after the general like sense of something being off, right? And they then will attach that feeling of something being awry to a specific complaint. He also argues that the flow from beginning to end is that they did not learn their lesson, and that really not just that they didn't learn the lesson, but maybe they would have, but like there was a general desire that emerges from the asaf suf, the riffraff, that then reignited the more general, I guess, discontent, and then it landed on the meat. Okay, so that's his approach. Yeah, Rob, remember?
Yes. So when I learned this 100 years ago,
Mhm.
so the riffraff had to do. They called them at the time Erev. Okay, and the question is, and the other thing is, the Jewish people are not in a Caribbean island here being waited on, right?
Right,
They're in the desert, the midbar, whatever
Right.
the midbar is.
right,
Okay. So I look at this as a lack of leadership.
right. Leadership, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why did you include people who are not part of the club, right?
Yeah.
It can only lead to bad things, as in Sodom and Gomorrah, and we have a whole
I
history
see.
of
Yeah,
where
I
you
see.
live is nothing good is gonna happen when you live
Right.
with bad people. And and now that they're complaining, but they had a tough upbringing, 200 years at slavery. Now they're in the midbar. They don't get a break. Where's the
All right.
break?
I want to break down a couple of the points, and then I want to go into a couple of other. I want to make sure that we hear some of the variegated interpretive modes from the sages before we jump in on what we agree with, and then add our voices to into different modes. Okay, that's my general kavanah. So just into what you said. So it's clear that the Torah is blaming the Asaf Suf, whoever they are, Erev Rav. But it's also clear that the complaining doesn't begin with them. The complaining actually was before them. In other words, whatever the Torah's agenda is here, by implicating this group of people with beginning the ta'ava, it's clear the Torah also goes out of its way to begin the entire parsha with the general population or a group of the general population, right? So vaya'am, it says vaya'am. The am is mitonim. So I just want to downplay slightly the Asaf Suf's role as important, but like not the essential moment here. And say that, yeah, of course, the people, and the second point you made is that the people haven't got a break. They've been enslaved for a long time, for sure. We'll see that in a moment. We'll see that it's hard for their mentality. If you've been a slave your whole life, right, it's not easy to receive, to shift gears, and when things are going well, out of the place of what's wrong. And so that's a general, beautiful teaching that emerges from this chapter. And we'll see some commentators notice that as well. So we can give them a break in a second. Okay, let's look at the Rabbeinu Bachya. So if you can move, yeah, I'll do the Hebrew here. So Rabbeinu Bachya also later, Rishon, he's in the Middle Ages. He writes that the word mitonen, which we said we began with, was like complaining. He sees it as if the people were as if looking for a pretext to complain. The word mitonen occurs in Lamentations, where it means complaint. As the people entered the desert, they experienced a variety of uncomfortable sensations. These complaints were very displeasing in the ears of God, seeing they were caused by the fact that instead of marching joyfully towards their destiny, the people marched only grudgingly. The reason the word mitonenim is spelled with the prefix taf, as we began, right? The preposition rather, describing something in a relative term, as if they were as if complaining, is because at this stage they did not yet dare verbalize their feelings of discontent. They did not want Moses to hear their complaint, and that's why the Torah describes God as hearing unspoken complaints by the people. Moses had not heard these complaints. So in Rabbeinu Bachya's rendering, essentially, there's two elements here. There's the complaint, and its silence is because the people did not have the audacity. There's something about their complaining that they knew was slightly off, given all of the things that they had been blessed with. There was a sense of shame in we know we're on our way. We should be marching joyfully. Like everything is going well. There is really no problem. We've got manna coming from heaven. It tastes like rich cream. But there's something wrong here. We're like something's off for us. And they kind of had that silent, they kept it to themselves out of that sense that they're not going to bring it to Moses yet. Out of shame, not feeling it's appropriate. And God in the first scene is upset because on some level God's like, really? Now, in modern sensibilities, we would say that that's really a divine, therapeutically a faux pas. There should be like a penalty flag thrown. All the therapists and good coaches in the room will say, like, you're the power structure, God. If people are complaining, right, listen, pull up a chair, or, come down on Mount Sinai again, invite them into a conversation. We'll get to that more modern reading and rendering, but I think it's not uncommon for there to be two schools of thought to emerge in general about when people complain, the best way to deal with it. One would call the empathetic school, which is the dominant in liberal circles and progressive circles, and more evolutionarily people who generally think that they're more evolved than the second camp, including myself and others over the years. Right? We're like, someone brings you a complaint, they're kvetching, right? Don't dare shame them. They didn't do anything wrong. There's something deeper. Okay, we'll get to that. But in this model, for a moment, the way that it was dealt with generally for about 2,000 some odd years, with very bad effect, some would argue, and I would probably agree to some extent, is like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? What is wrong with you? You have everything you could possibly want. And God's displeasure with their displeasure is the response in scene one. And Rabbeinu Bachya supports that. Says, of course. What do you mean? Like, grow up. Like, snap out of it. You got everything you want. You got clothing on your back. You've got water. It comes out of rocks for you when you're thirsty. They got God coming down on Mount Sinai. What are you lacking? So that's kind of Rabbeinu Bachya. And it's supported in a way by the next source. Source number 7 is Ibn Ezra, a lot earlier, who actually sees Kimit Onanim as Migizrat Aven, or like, right, that he sees Mitonanim here is not complaining, but like complaining with an evil slant, like sinful complaining. So there's a valence in the Ibn Ezra that supports Rabbeinu Bachya of like, mitonanim. He doesn't harp on the prefix, the preposition ke. He harps on the fact that the word onen or onanim is from aven, machshavot aven, right? Which means they were sinfully. It was an element of error involved here. Now, I don't want to harp on number 7. It kind of underscores. Let's go to the Ramban, Nachmanides in Spain in the 13th century, who takes issue with Ibn Ezra, as you'll see, and doesn't think that it's Avin or wickedness, but something else. You look at the bottom of source 8 in the English on the bottom of the page, just all the way there. Good, Caroline, thank you so much. The Ramban says, Rabbi Eben Ibn Ezra commented that the word Kimit Odanim is from the root Avin, wickedness. And he quotes similarly the thoughts of evil, Machshavot, Onech, where they spoke words of wickedness. But this is not correct. For why would Scripture have concealed their sin and not stated it clearly what it was, as it does in every other place? In other words, he doesn't have a psychological or theological problem. He says it just doesn't make any sense. If they had been speaking things that were, quote unquote, sinful, rebellious, whatever it is, why would Scripture in this moment, why would the Torah in this moment elide over it and just keep it in an amorphous, general complaint? So it's not about sinning. He says the correct interpretation appears to me to be that they got, as they got further away from Sinai, this is to you, Rob, okay, which was near an inhabitable settlement, and entered, turn the page, a great and dreadful wilderness. In their first journey, they became upset. What shall we do? How shall we live in this wilderness? What shall we eat and what shall we drink? How shall we endure the trouble and suffering? And when shall we come out of here? The word kimit onanim is thus related to the expression, where doth a living man yithonein, a strong man because of his sins, which is an expression indicating pain and feeling sorry for oneself. So they're not complaining out of a place of evil intent. They're not sinning, but recognizing, the Ramban says, that they're coming from a place of fear and anxiety. They're entering a place of uncertainty and the unknown. They begin to wonder out loud, to themselves from a place of anxious survival instinct, right? And so we have to see, like, so what is it? So why does God, see, thus when Scripture states that they felt anxious and upset, it has thereby already mentioned and told the nature of their sin. It states that they were kimit oranim, as murmurers, meaning that they spoke in the bitterness of their soul, as do people who suffer pain. And this was evil in the sight of God, since they should have followed God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart by reason of the abundance of all good things which God gave them. But they behaved like people acting under duress and compulsion, murmuring and complaining about their condition. It is for this reason that God states with regard to the second sin or punishment, and the children of Israel also wept again, meaning that their first sin consisted of complaining about their lack of comforts in the wilderness, and now they again did a similar thing, and they did not receive correction from the fire of God, which had devoured them. So let's bracket the God psychology in for a moment. It essentially throws God under the bus for us moderns, because God's reaction seems even worse now, because it's not, they weren't sinfully and aggressively complaining, but more anxiously complaining. But in the Ramban's working here, the people are lacking faith. They lacked faith. And their lack of faith is not met with understanding and compassion from God, but with rebuke, as if to say, you have been given everything you need to have faith. Should we have to keep, what's the work here? Like, do you not already get it? That you should be happy, sated. If we were to replace God's rebuke with something gentler, but also still stern, right? Without all of the energy behind the violence and all the aggression that we have to bracket because it's a Bronze Age text for a moment, right? Seeing it more archetypally or more archetypally, what is going on. So in this camp, it's like sometimes a boundary and not sympathy is what is warranted, but what's happening here is anxiety and uncertainty. So that's like, okay, now let's stop for a second. We're going to get we'll get a little bit more Buddhist in a second, but yes,
So,
Bhatia and then people in the Zoom Agag. Patya.
So complaining in a way is like being enslaved to your thinking that you can't open up and think to someone else's, especially God's way. You're totally enslaved to your own thoughts. And I think that's what was meant that God, wanted our fire, I would say, like to burn them up. I took them out of Egypt and now look at them, they're complaining. So it totally closed. Their minds are totally closed for anything else, because it's one thing not to like something, but at least you can be open to hearing someone else.
Shavati. I heard you. Yes. Yes.
I was
Yes.
thinking for the first time the asaf soup could maybe be internal.
The whole thing could be internal. Yeah.
Right?
That assumes it's
Like
like,
Rob, like
yeah.
say the outside it's internal, but God heard, God is the only person who heard the initial complaint, and now
Right.
it's continuous. It's internal.
Yeah, I mean, you can make this easily into a, and
Yeah,
we can get to this in a minute, but we can make it into a Buddhist contemplative practice. The part, each of this is different parts of us. The part of us that complains is always lack, is always feeling lack, the craving part. And then the God in us, right, which burns with clarity and burns with energy, says, sit straight and look deeply into this complaint. The Asaf Suf, which is the parts that always feel left out and feeling lacking, also started up again. And then the entire manganon, the whole of your being, becomes caught up in what's lacking. And even in that moment, you might forget that the part of you that's watching the whole scene. The whole scene is gestalt for the internal universe, right? The different parts of us that are in awareness, different voices, and of course, the inside is not different than the outside. In a community, there's the part that will be played by the ones who see something lacking, and immediately from those who are seeing something lacking, another part will come. It's like it's organizational, psychology 101. It's all right here, and we'll see from Harvard Business Review in a second. A different approach, but like it's based on this too. Okay, let's move in to oh sorry yeah, Amy, yeah, and then Jill quickly.
Um, according to Midrash says, uh, they craved meat because man was a spiritual nourishment rather than a physical one. They could see the melons growing. They didn't really know for sure that the man was going to show up. So it took some spiritual acceptance or belief that this would show up. Again, according to Midrash, it says they remembered the fish they ate in Egypt because there they didn't have to say a blessing. They didn't want to be burdened with the mitzvah of blessing. But more importantly, some people said, how can we stay well on a food that causes no excretion? We are afraid that we will eventually our stomachs will burst. We keep eating, but we're not excreting. And so they were afraid that physically they would burst. And I want to say, just super briefly, I lived near Florida State University, and I was a subject of research, and we did watermelon as a research project. And watermelon will help the blood to flow through the veins. So, as my Yankee friends, uh, you're so warm now, you're not used to being warm. Eat a lot of watermelon. It'll help the blood flow and cool you off.
It might be too politically fraught at this moment to eat watermelon, but I appreciate that. Jill, thank you, Amy. Jill, go ahead.
I really like the comment. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name. That she made about kind of being enslaved to your thoughts, and also what you were saying about kind of modern, psychology today, or modern political social justice kind of ways of thinking that seem more evolved, where we listen to somebody's complaint and we're just, yeah, I hear you, I get it, even if you don't, or even if you know or think, or can see another way, and so I just wanted to kind of put an idea out there that people who are kind of stuck and enslaved to their own thoughts, who think that they're empathetic when someone else is, worried, et cetera, when they're listening, maybe they could learn how to be empathetic to the person who wants to give them advice versus just listening passively and agreeing with everything that they say. I don't think there's a lot of room for that these days. So that's it. I just wanted to pull
Yeah,
those two comments together.
yeah. Well, thank you. We'll come back to that. Come back to that approach. I need to go forward. But source number 9, and we'll come back. We'll have another moment for us to weigh in. Let's look at the continuation of the story. So Moshe heard the people crying, each one in their families. Verse 10 in chapter 11. And we're in source 9. A lot of numbers there. Source 9, chapter 11, verse 10. And Vayichar af Adonai Ma'od v'nei Moshe Ra. So both God now and Moshe are pretty upset. Yomer Moshe Adonai Lama Rosa. Now Moshe turns to God and says, why did you deal in an evil way with me, your servant? Moshe begins to feel overwhelmed by the people's, the weight of the people, which of course mirrors Jethro and chapter 18 of the book of Exodus. It says, it's too heavy for me. Did I birth this people, which is great, like a great image, a maternal image? Did I give birth to them? That you tell me that I should carry them in my bosom, like a wet nurse carries a baby that is nursing. Where am I going to get meat from? Let's take the kolam hazeh. That they're crying out to me, to Nulanu, basar. They're asking me for meat. And then this verse 14, which is exactly the verse of Jethro in Mirror. Jethro had said this to his son-in-law about jurisprudence, about the adjudication of the juridical system of the Jews. Where Jethro said to him, you can't carry all of the weight of this, of all of the different issues that come before you. You have to set up a magistrate and so on. Now Moshe, mirroring his own internalized father-in-law advice, says, I can't carry this people alone. It's too heavy for me, which is beautiful, by the way. He admits it, right? He comes forward to God, he says, listen, I can't do it alone. And then he goes into his, under the line thinking. He gets a little bit childish here. And if so, you're going to deal with me. Kill me. This is so Jewish. Oh my God. You are going to kill me. This child is going to kill, it's like Moshe is like such a yente. It's like, relax. If I found favor with you, I can't see any more of my own wretchedness. I'm done. Right now, if you look at source 10, this is from a much more modern source than Netziv. Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin in the 19th century writes, I can't carry them alone. This argument is that I'm not like their father, but more like their caregiver. Interesting, like gender roles and interesting. But a parent naturally knows how to appease their child, to which I'm shocked that he said that, but maybe that's true. I don't know. But I don't have the strength to carry all of the entire nation, even though certainly Moses had the ability to persuade and appease, but not the entire people. In other words, there are too many needs. They're too disparate. Some of you, in our own community, we only have 600 families. We're 800 families, 750 families. But even in our own community, there are different camps. Like one camp wants me to say a prayer for this group. Another camp wants me to say a prayer for another group. One group wants me to be more innovative in davening, but people want more tradition. Are you kidding me? It's like when some people want us to move down to a neighborhood that that's closer to where more families are. Some people want us to what do you do? Some people want to stay in this building. I can't believe we sold the building. Some are like, no, we can't go back. Moshe Rabbeinu is like, I can't do it. It's impossible. And he says, it's too heavy a burden. The nature of this people, each one with their own opinion, it's too much for me to metabolize in a way that might satisfactorily settle their minds. Right? In the Hebrew, the great phrase, I can't metabolize all of their different opinions. The Chizkuni writes, I cannot all by myself. Moses had said all this after the fire of God had burned against the officers. The Chizkuni reads this complaint against the first scene where there was the fire in the camp. He said that fire, I look, some of the most, like my cabinet were the complainers in the first scene. So I lost all of them. Now I'm by myself. I don't have a cabinet, which is what leads God to now. God responds to Moshe's complaint. Now, what's interesting internally to this text is that Moshe, the complaint of the people leads Moshe to complain. Like Moshe is speaking to God in such a kvetchy way, and you see that the kvetchiness of the people has actually borne fruit in the kvetchiness of the leader. Right? It's not only that the people came below the line without a solution, with just kvetching, but now Moshe doesn't come from a place of adult mind and clarity. He doesn't turn to God and say, "Listen, God, I have a plan. You approve the plan." Instead, Moshe comes with the pain of lack. I can't. Whenever someone says I can't, you know that they're not in their adult mind for the most part. For the most part. Now I'm interpolating more modern sensibilities, but like it's like now God's solution, which by the way Moses has as at his own. Moshe knows what to do because he's already seen it with the situation in chapter 18 in Exodus. His father-in-law gave him advice. He didn't go to God. Jethro was God. Jethro said, "Listen, here's what you need to do. You know, you think you need to do this by yourself? Why don't you deputize people?" Oh, what a crazy idea. And now God's going to come back with exactly the same idea. And look at the language in source 13, just internally to the text. Internal to the text, look at source 13, where God says to Moshe, and tell me what this word in Hebrew reminds you of from another moment earlier in our text. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, and God said to Moshe, Sfa li, shirim ish miziknei Yisrael. Asfa li. What does that sound like? Asaf Suf. The source of the problem is also the solution to the problem. The people, the riffraff, were the ungathered in. They gathered in alone, but they weren't gathered in by Moshe to God. They were the Asaf Suf. But God says, don't Asaf Suf them, Etzfa li, bring them to me. In other words, elevate them. There's wisdom in your people. Give me 70 people who will give you advice, who will be able to be your sounding board, right? Who will be able to be the ones who hear, right? And then, right, the scene, this beautiful scene of smicha, of this laying on of the hands of spirit. God says, bring them to me and stand them there, and then I will come down and I'll speak with you with them. Verse 17, if you're following the English, I will come down, I will speak with you, and I will give you atzalti, from the word atzilut, I will give you of my ruach, of the spirit that is on you, Moses. I will share your spirit with them, and they will be able to carry it with you, and you will not then have to carry it alone. And then he tells them, and then that's the end of Moshe's complaint. But God doesn't have the same compassion for the people's complaint. Watch what God said. Tell the people, though, that they should get ready tomorrow, to sanctify themselves tomorrow, purify yourselves tomorrow, to eat meat, because you cried in the ears of God, saying, who will give us meat? Because it was better in Egypt. God will give you meat, and you will eat meat. Verse 19, not one day you will eat, not 2 days, not 5, not 10, not even 20 days, but 1 full month of eating until it comes out of your noses, right? Until your nostrils. It will be loathsome to you. When you rejected God, saying, why did you ever leave Egypt? Now, that's not the end of the story, because as you'll see, right, that Moses comes to God immediately and says, that's a great idea, but how am I going to get the meat for the people? And he uses the word again, of Yaasef in verse 22. If you look at source 14, Moshe says, I have 600,000 people, and you tell them that they're going to have meat for a month. Did you check in with me? Because do we have cattle in order to slaughter for them? And do I have enough fish, right, to gather in? And then God gets angry with Moshe and says, Hayad Adonai Tiksar, do I have a short arm? Everybody's infected with this contagion, which is lack of faith in God in this story, right? And we can just stop here for a second and look at source 18. And we don't have to go into this. Actually, we don't need any more sources. I'll just tell it to you outside. We'll open it up for comments before we finish with the Harvard Business spiel. So let's just open it up for people. The source I was going to give you is from Rabbi Sachs, who says essentially that what's operative here is just two things. One is a lack of faith in God and God's capacity to take the people where they need to go. It's like in Buddhism would say, it's a constant arising of doubt, constant dose of doubt about the possibility of liberation, of the possibility of the practice really working, the possibility of really leaving Egypt in the deepest way, the constant, like no matter how many miracles happen, no matter how many moments of clarity we have of mind and heart, we still come back to essential doubt because it's not over. We haven't arrived at the promised land yet. We're still in the liminal space. We're still suffering. There's still craving, right? And then we add insult to injury by beginning to feed those parts that are doubting. And then it really takes over even the Moses within us and the Moses without us. Then leaders themselves lose their center. Even the part of us that knows the truth, that's seen the truth, begins to become very diluted. And it leads to like radical doubt. Not just like even when God is speaking to Moses, Moses is speaking to God. I mean, that's what the story is so fundamentally crazy making. Moses in a conversation with the creator of the universe. Moshe says, I heard you. Thank you so much for the advice on the 70 elders. Thanks for the splitting the sea and the 10 plagues. Thanks for the water and the manna and all the miracles. But like this one is really too big for you too, God. Like really, like where are you going to get the meat? And by the way, they had meat. They brought out. They already had cattle. The Torah tells us that they brought cattle. The whole story makes no sense. And Moshe's incredulity is itself. It's a remarkable, yet again, underscoring that it's not just the people that are lacking faith, but even Moshe himself, like becomes infected with this fear of what's unknown, even in his conversations with God. Like, is the Torah aware of its own inner contradiction? Is the Torah and the author of Torah aware of how crazy it is to imagine that a people that saw God's miraculous power would also doubt a small miracle like making 600,000 people fed by meat, like manna from heaven? Like, are they aware of their own internal inconsistencies that we would then criticize them? Like maybe the Torah thinks that it's no big deal to see God coming down, and you could still doubt, but it seems outrageous. And God's response to Moses is not nearly as harsh as it is to the people. He doesn't say to Moses, really? Are you kidding me? He just says, you'll see. Like, but he has the question, is my hand too short? Which is a question of God's omnipotence and power. Do you still doubt my power? And so we're left with that. And I just want to open it up, but leave room for a bit in about 6 or 7 minutes for us to go to the Harvard Business and the conversation, and how should we respond to kvetch from this story in our lives and in our person. So we'll start with Paul. Caroline, you can bring the text down off the screen, and I'm going to take a look and see whose hands are up. We're going to go to Paul in the room, Jay in the Zoom, and then back into the room. Paul, go ahead.
I'm wondering why the redactors gave us the narrative arc that we are. Why aren't these rebellion narratives much earlier in the story? We should be getting these
before Sinai.
before Sinai.
Yeah,
And
totally.
we should be dealing with these Sinai. And Sinai should be, and the whole Levitical worship structure should be in direct response to all these various. But we don't have that.
What do you think?
And I don't know, obviously, but what comes immediately to mind is that redactors are telling us about how life really works. Leaders should be better. The people who are led should be better. But they're not. And they never will be, regardless of the intercession of God, regardless of the miraculous appearances of food and fire and smoke. People and the leaders of people are, and it's a mess. And the reason that we don't enter the promised land within the structure of the first 5 books is just, we don't really ever get there. And the best that we can do is fetch and hope that we can gain some satisfaction.
So I want to gently push back, although I love the question. I also love the answer, and I want to just push back slightly and say that one could also see, like in it, the redactor could also have a very clear purpose that is also still irrelevant to us, which is we have to buy into some of the redactor's own assumptions about the nature of reality. Like in the redactor's telling, that first of all, we know the end of the story because the redactor knows that whoever's going to read this is going to know the end of the story. Presumably, if we were using the redactor as a human redactor, the redactor is already in the having arrived in the promised land reality, right? And knowing, as the redactor does, that we're going to arrive at the promised land is like a moviegoer seeing the movie for the second time. We know the end of the story, so you have to factor that in. And in the redactor's mind, if you know the end of the story, right, and the Israelites should trust that they're eventually going to get there, then the redactor's purpose is to tell a cautionary tale that will then impact us going forward. We know the end of the story. We know that they're not going to make it in if they continue to complain. So we best not act as they did, lest we also not enter. They did not, right? And it even it makes the case even stronger because be really careful, because even if you saw miracles, even if you received the Torah, even if you sent spies in, you still might fall prey to this. So this entire story is for you, listener, later on, so that you not have the same fate befall you. But what we might take issue with is we don't see miracles. We don't have like the assumption of the characters are so flawed because they had those things. We who did not have those things might not, like it might not. Why should we have the kind of faith that eluded them? If it eluded them and they still saw miracles, why should it not elude us? And don't tell me just read the book of Numbers and it'll be good for you, because we have no such self-assurance. We were in exile in the Ukraine and in Poland, like, yeah, it's going to be good. It was good during the Chalniki. Like, we have all kinds of reasons to doubt a God who doesn't appear in fire and in brimstone and clouds. So I agree with you. It's kind of an odd structure of the narrative. I also would agree that it would be better suited in some ways another way. But the last thing I'll say is that it's also true that maybe people don't make it into the promised land because of their doubts. I hate to tell you, but this is not a happy ending. Like, these people who saw the miracles and made it out of Egypt never made it into the promised land. They died in the desert. And there is no Hollywood ending for them in the book of Numbers. Like, there is no Hollywood ending. They were too stuck in the old paradigm. No matter how many years and how many miracles they saw, it did not make it in to their consciousness until finally God says, you know what, I give up. Just forget it. It's going to have to be a new generation.
And perhaps that's the answer to the question. What
Right.
brings us back to that is that every time we pick it up again or see it again, we see something.
Yeah.
And that's what the redactors want us to do.
I think that's true too. I think that's true. All right, what a great little. Okay, great. So we're gonna go to. Thank you, Paul. Jay, go to.
Jay,
Yeah, go. What should I
I'm
know?
trying. Hi, I'm still trying to sort of square the circle of the two scenes. It's actually quite fascinating, the idea of generalized private versus specific public, leading to very different consequences. One obvious difference is that the public one can lead to an intercession because Moshe is aware of it. But I want to rehabilitate Moshe here a little bit because it's in the Jewish humor kind of thing, isn't it ironic that Moshe himself comes in with a big complaint? But if you look at the two, it seems like the people's complaint is unbelievable. It's like totally based on projection and whatever. Whereas Moshe's complaint, notwithstanding its little bit of histrionic rhetoric, has a real basis in reality. I think the burden is too big, and some of the some of the solutions are very practical solutions that God gives him. So I think that that's a key difference in the kvetching department, where there's a basis in reality and something needs to be changed versus something that's like really projection and has very little basis in reality.
Right, but I also would add, I love that. I think that you're right. I think there is a difference in the complaints, and they are different in tenor and in style. But if we work from the assumption that a complaint can always be framed in a positive request as opposed to a complaint, right? And in the difference between, then there is actually no difference in kind between the two because they're both desires. Like Moshe wants support. He doesn't like, but he frames it first as kill me because I can't handle it. And the people could have easily said, we really have a hunger for meat. Can we have some meat? But instead, they say, Mi achli and basar, and a number of commentators say that it's not a question, it's a rhetorical statement. There was no one to give us meat. And then they frame it also with, we want what we once had in Egypt. And so there's a bite to it also. There's not just, hey, you're giving us miraculous manna from heaven. You think you could throw in some quail? It's framed in such a pejorative, almost like a poking in the eye of the divine to say we're disgusted with your manna, and I think that in the Bronze Age way of beating people up and getting angry at them is what's lost is like the subtle importance of the lesson around the nature of a complaint and it something being constructive versus something that becomes like God as the power figure here can't hear the complaint. And I can't tell you how often in my own coaching sessions with my various coaches over the years that I've come in with complaints that took me an hour to finally arrive at what is exactly that I might frame as a positive request. Like, I needed to vent first for like 45 minutes about how upset I am before finally my coach would say, I hear you, but I want you to hear the way it will sound to your colleagues. I can tell you at 92nd Street Y, I came in and there were so many things that in my eyes were like, I would say, I wish I were back at Romemu because at Romemu, I had this kind of watermelon and that kind of meat and like, I could be very proudly Jewish and at the Y it's a much more complicated place and they don't like me being overly Jewy and that kind of thing. And it was really, I would literally heard myself complaining at every single meeting I have with the CEO. And finally I was like, really? Do you want to come up with like an incrementalist approach to changing the atmosphere here in a way that will bring it onto the road to where you want it to go? And it's amazing that Moshe, right, who already had this information in his DNA and saw that like what would happen when I can't handle it, it's too heavy, this is what I need to do, that he needed God to come along and remind him of that. And so I think, Jay, you're right, Jay, that they're very different. One's legitimate, one is a desire but not a need necessarily. But if the purpose of the text is to teach us something about that, then maybe they're the same in certain ways.
Yeah, but
we have a lot of
the burden should not be totally on the complainer, as you just said. In other words, God heard Moshe, notwithstanding the style of the complaint.
Yes.
Not only on the complaint.
Maybe because it was in that way, it was because God heard Moshe because there was some basis. Yeah, that's a good question. Why, the burden is on also the listener to some extent as well to respond Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, great. So, in the room, Jesse, and then Jesse, and then we'll come back to the Zoom, but quickly because we're like, yeah, go Jesse.
So, yeah, I want to emphasize what you were saying in the beginning, the kvetching, because it was a beautiful way to start. That's an exciting part of our tradition as Jews, that we kvetch, right? And that we celebrate complaining. I think it's very cool because we're willing to sort of say what we feel. We're willing to like try to change things because we're concerned about how things are. And we're not like, we should be emotionless and, like other cultures, right? We're kvetchers, and that's fantastic because that's where you have to start. And there's so many Jewish scholars that talk about like that discontent or that human condition
Yes.
as where we have to begin. Like it makes me think of, Buber doesn't say we live in I thou, we live in I it, and then we get to I thou.
Yes.
Levinas doesn't say like we
Right.
see the infinite other, we see the same and we
Right.
move to see the infinite
Right.
other. Right? It's so endemic to our tradition and a wonderful thing, a strong thing, an aspect of who we
Yeah.
are.
So I want to say that there is something broader at play, which is what Jürgen Habermas, the great German philosopher, wrote about where religion emerges. He wrote from an awareness of what is missing. The awareness of what is missing might be called metaphysical blues, right? Like there's a sense of anomie that is ingrained in the dislocation that we experience as spiritual beings in physical form, and that the inability and the impossibility of this phenomenal world to fully satisfy that itch that we have, that we can't ever have it satisfied. And that, of course, that great, like the great desire. So this is where Buddhism beautifully, and also in Kabbalah, also Hasidus, the difference between the smaller wants and the biggest wants. The biggest want is God, as we would say, or meaning, purpose, a sense of location, the sense of, we might say that the ultimate desire is to be released from all smaller desires. Right? It's kind of a paradox in the language of desire. In Buddhism, we might say that the greatest desire is to be free, to be liberated. And we wouldn't want to extinguish that greatest desire, because otherwise we would remain in ignorance. The longing for freedom, writ large, physical, emotional, spiritual, is itself rooted in a dissatisfaction, a great dukkha, a great chet, a great missing of the mark of reality. And that the only way to have it, right, what that thirst quenched is through spirit. But it's true though that to be in discontent is also the root of entrepreneurship. It's the root of social justice. It's like dissatisfaction with the status quo is a fundamental element of changing the world, right? And the minute we say, oh, everything's great, so it's true that on a spectra we can be right. So the question, of course, becomes: does kvetching become an identity, and does kvetching become a prism through which we see the world, such that it's almost impossible for us to get out of the kvetch mind, the victim sometimes mind, or the warrior for social justice mind, and think in terms of what can be done in order to make things different? And here, that I would argue that I want to read a piece in our business group, but I know that there are a lot of people with thoughts, and it's going to be one more in the room, and then we have two more. But quick, nobody spoke, but I love you. I know. I can't carry this people. So many people want to speak in with 5-10 minutes, but we want to get the balance, the old, the new. Go ahead.
I'm going to confess you.
Yes. Go ahead.
Actually, the depth of skepticism
Yes.
that, like, I'm new, so I'm learning these words. Moshe
Yes.
shows, even though he sees these extraordinary
Miracles.
which would blow anyone away. Does that speak to somehow initially in an upbringing of a person, they get hurt, doing very psychological, or is it nature or nurture?
Got it.
Is it
Totally. So let's look. We have to. I'm sorry. I said I would, but I can't. I have to. I got to read this Arjun Business Review. It's really right. This is an actual case of chronic complaining. Look at this. Source 21. Lisa couldn't stand it any longer. Every time she met her colleague Peter, one of the senior executives at the large retail chain when they both worked, he would begin an endless lament about his work, the government, and his personal life. After listening to Peter's moaning, it didn't take long before she experienced a claustrophobic reaction. It didn't help that whenever Lisa tried to reframe Peter's situation more positively, he would revert back to his negativity. Peter's constant grumbling, whining, and lamenting was toxic for everyone, himself included. Research shows that chronic complaining like Peter's has physiological effects. Through the repetition of bad, sad, and mad, powerless feelings, the neurotransmitters in the brain can go through a neural rewiring, which reinforces negative thought patterns, making it easier for unhappy thoughts to repeat themselves and leaving little room for the more positive feelings of gratitude, appreciation, and well-being. The continuous cycle of negative thoughts may even cause damage to the hippocampus, part of the brain used for problem solving and cognitive functioning. See? Constantly thinking about what's wrong can also, Moshe, stop you from figuring out how to solve the problem. Over time, complainers become negativity addicts, attracted to the drama that comes with the complaining attitude. They're also prone to black and white thinking. Compromise isn't part of the equation, and no wonder that chronic complainers like Peter are more likely to see problems instead of solutions, making it very difficult to work with them. Given their negativity, it is hard for them to make decisions and solve problems. Chronically complaining about things creates more things to complain about. And chronic complainers have a damaging effect on those around them. People are thinking and reacting in negative and pessimistic ways without realizing it. They transfer these feelings onto others in a process psychologists called projective identification. It's as if they use other people as a kind of garbage can for their negativity, making these others feel weighted down and exhausted. Interestingly, it is very likely that this kind of transfer is part of our evolutionary makeup. Some neuroscientists have suggested that human beings possess what are called mirror neurons. We know that to be true, that are important for survival. As social beings, our brains unconsciously mimic the moods of the people around us, which can be an advantage when we are faced with danger. It can also serve as a form of social cohesion, right? Like we're in it together. Like you start complaining to somebody in the office, next thing you know, they're both complaining. They're like, "Oh, yes, she really is a problem." This neuronal mirroring. This neuronal mirroring, however, has a flip side. People who complain about everything become contagious, and before we realize it, we ourselves turn into complainers. Did this person read chapter 11 of the book of Numbers?
Yeah.
It's amazing, right? Moshe becomes a complainer. Others become complainers. The riffraff started it again, and then before you know it, they were complaining. But complaining isn't all bad, as Jesse pointed out. Occasional venting and expression of negative emotions to a colleague about difficult situations allows us to get our concerns out into the open, and in doing so, it lessens possible stress reactions. And we feel connected. Repressing our feelings may stop us from naming our problem and getting to the bottom of it. So people also complain in order to feel better about themselves. Peter wanted Lisa's validation for how unfair or annoying the situation was, and to establish some kind of emotional connection. But complaints can also be used as a way to exercise power and influence perceptions, especially within an organization or a family or a relationship, which can be hotbeds of political games. People use complaining to get people's support. And on this interpretation, Peter might have been trying to recruit Lisa to his point of view concerning what he thought was wrong with some of the people in the organization. Now, attempts to help chronic complainers often have little or no effect. And here's the takeaway, and we got to come in for a landing, and you can turn off. People can read this. I got to come in for a landing with this. And I see Thomas. I know there are a lot of people who want to say something, but I want to say something clearly. It's not always true. As I said last night in the why, and I would have said here, it's not always true that the way to help a person out of their complaining mindset is to ask them to go deeper to find what it is that's really irking them, really underneath it all. In other words, I said this last night, and it's somewhat true. I do believe that underneath every complaint is a sense of something being off even before we know what we're complaining about, and that if we get to the root of it, it can also help. But the way to get to the root of it is not always by empathy. It's not always there is, as Jay said, the responsibility of the listener to the complaint. It is often that is the case. It is often that truly skillful listeners can help someone